Before I get into this video, I just want to say that if my voice gets a little weird partway through, I have a head cold, and that's it. Thank you. In light of recent events, I have seen a lot of people saying that Cedar Point is going downhill hard and fast. I advise you to watch this one all the way through before commenting about the title or introduction to hear my complete point. While I have made dedicated videos about both the boardwalk and dragster, I would like to spend some time today looking at Cedar Point as a whole and more than just the sum of its individual parts to answer once and for all if this park is in fact going downhill. I would like to preface that while most of this video focuses on coasters, there is a segment about the rest of the park in which I discuss flat rides, food, resorts, etc. While I'm not going to go back to 1870 to get a grasp on Cedar Point's history, I do have to go back a little bit to get a solid picture of what I would argue is the golden age of Cedar Point, that being the 90s through the late 2000s. The founding actions really began for this era with the opening of Magnum in 1989, so let's pick up there. As mentioned, 1989 saw the opening of Magnum XL 200, which smashed records across the board. Droves of people swarmed into the park to have their chance to ride the first ever hypercoaster, or coaster over 200 feet. The reception for this ride was out of this world, even while the ride had upstop paddles instead of wheels, meaning the ride experience was much more jarring and jerky with its airtime moments. This success pushed the entire amusement industry as a whole to try to go bigger, faster, and scarier. Cedar Point would go on to open 4 coasters in the following decade, all of which are still either operating or have been transformed and have a clear legacy in the park. Starting with Mean Streak in 1991, Cedar Point opened the world's tallest and fastest wooden coaster, meaning they held both the record for steel and wood at this point. That was huge for marketing reasons. To put in perspective how massive Mean Streak was, if it was still standing as it once was, it would still be in the top 5 tallest wooden coasters over 30 years later. Cedar Point had yet another hit on their hands with Mean Streak, and though it would come to be known as one of the roughest coasters in the world, it started off strong and really set the tone for this golden era of Cedar Point. To follow up Mean Streak, Cedar Point reached out to a new manufacturer in 1994 to make yet another record breaker. To be fair, when Bolliger and Maviard, or B&M, stepped in to make Raptor, only 6 inverts have been created thus far, with 3 of them being clones. These records were a bit easier to grab, but they're still impressive nonetheless. Just a quick list, Raptor was the tallest, fastest, and longest inverted coaster in history, and also introduced the Cobra roll to inverted coasters. The impact of this ride can really not be overstated, honestly, and though it is far from my favorite at the park, it certainly played a big part in the golden era of Cedar Point and its expansion. Honestly, tallest, longest, and fastest should have been Cedar Point's motto in the 90s and 2000s. They called up B&M another time just 2 years later in 1996 to create another monstrosity of a machine. Mantis was the world's longest, tallest, and fastest stand-up coaster. No amount of this combination would prepare anybody for what Cedar Point was planning in 2000 though.
At the turn of the millennium, there were signs.
Millennium Force was something never seen before, a crazy dream come true. Only 11 years after the 200-foot record was broken, Cedar Point did it again with the first ever Giga Coaster, or a coaster cracking the 300-foot mark. Topping out at 92 miles per hour, this ride was briefly the tallest and fastest coaster in the world, until Steel Dragon opened later that season. Millennium is more than just its stats though. It created a culture that to this day is unmatched by almost any other coaster. Millennium Force has an almost cult-like following, and 22 years later, still draws lines that compare with the biggest, newest rides in the park. Cedar Point hit a massive home run here. Before I get into 2003, I really quickly want to address Wicked Twister. It no longer stands, and it may have been just another impulse, but it was the tallest impulse and only impulse with 2 twisted spikes. Anyway, 3 years after the term Giga was invented, the Stratocoaster was born. Top Thrill Dragster was the world's first coaster to crack the 400-foot mark. With a top speed of a blazing 120 miles per hour, Dragster was the fastest coaster as well, really hammering down on that tallest and fastest methodology. Arguably the most iconic coaster ever, right up there with Millennium, Dragster remains an iconic part of the Cedar Point skyline to this day. I'm sure that couldn't possibly be foreshadowing anything. 2007 had the final edition of what I would consider to be the golden age of Cedar Point. Ironically, this is the year that tallest, fastest, longest flew out the window at 70 miles per hour, but it did have its own special name. The Terra Coaster really isn't anything meaningful, but I thought I'd throw it out there. Anyway, 2007 saw the opening of Maverick, a short coaster that stayed low to the ground and focused on intensity, whippiness, and an overall more barbaric ride experience. With a max height of just over 100 feet and a top speed of 70 miles an hour during its mid-course launch, this little machine packed a lot into its small footprint. The real selling point of Maverick at the time was the 95-degree first drop, but these days I honestly find the rest of the layup holds up basically as well. After this edition, Cedar Point had a major shift in how it conducted business. From 2000 through 2007, every coaster added to Cedar Point was made by one company, Intamin. You should check out my most recent video about this manufacturer for more information, but long story short, Cedar Fair lost interest in working with the company after 2010, and there was a massive gap in the progress of new coasters. The park really took its time looking for the next manufacturer to make a working relationship with, and no new coasters were added until 2013. Gatekeeper was added in this year, which started a couple of B&M coasters being added to the park. I will skip over the 2010s largely as I consider them to be the teardown phase before the rebuild of Cedar Point. 2015 had the floorless conversion of Mantis to Rougarou, 2016 added Valraven, and 2018 had the RMC conversion of Main Street to Steel Vengeance. Oh, and restaurants. There was another gap between 2018 and the impending Wild Mouse being added for 2023, but this time I think of a new era of Cedar Point beginning. I call this era the rebuilding era. The pandemic of 2020 really shook Cedar Fair and hit them where they fear it most, in the wallet. I have a video going in depth about this, and it's going to be linked in the description, so again, I'm going to keep it brief, but basically, if parks did not adapt to their situation, they were going to collapse. Cedar Point responded by opening the Farmhouse restaurant in Frontierland. I actually really enjoy this restaurant and don't understand why people complain about so many restaurants at Cedar Point. It's clear that if Cedar Point wants to survive, they have to adapt to be a true destination park. Next upgrade needs to be the bathrooms, but that's a different conversation in and of itself. So now that we're caught up on the basics of Cedar Park's coaster editions, let's look at other specific things about the park. I think you would be hard-pressed to find someone who cannot find something to eat at this park. The options are honestly quite varied and the dining plans are a really good deal. The flat ride collection is quite expansive. While I'm not personally a fan of many flat rides, I do have to say that they balance the most basic GP style rides with the higher end thrill rides wonderfully and provide plenty of experiences for those not interested in roller coasters. In terms of events, Cedar Point always has something going on. From the start of June with Frontier Fest and Wild Frontier Nights until the end of August with Cedar Point Nights, there's always something extra to do. The hotels and resorts are perfectly acceptable, if not great, depending on where you stay, and ultimately, I have to say Cedar Point is in a decent place right now. Honestly, the possible revamping of Dragster after its official retirement announcement on September 6th of this year is a great chance for Cedar Point to start fresh and hit the ground running over again. I truly believe the park is using this time to rebuild a solid foundation, similar to how Magnum was the foundation for the Golden Age. They obviously aren't anchoring this next era on the rebuilding of a coaster, but on the diversity of what they have to offer, and that is great in my opinion. To answer the question in the title, no, I do not believe Cedar Point is going downhill. I think they went uphill so fast in their Golden Age that they overshot the peak of the mountain, and it took the better part of 15 years to stop from tumbling back down. They're currently preparing to hike back up, and in my opinion, standing still in preparation is better than backsliding. That's all I have for you today. Let me know what you think down below. This one is highly opinionated, so please let's keep it civil in the comments. I'm Josh from Station Wait. Have a great day.